And Rob, if you'll start with the third step prayer, sir.
You got it, sir. Hi, everybody. Rob K, recovered alcoholic. And I'm going to be reading the third step prayer if you want to follow along on page 63 of your big book. God, I offer myself to thee.
I offer myself to thee.
To build with me.
Build with me.
And do with
and
me.
To do with me as thou wilt.
Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. I do thy will always.
All right, guys. All right. Well, it's kind of exciting. We're going to start the big book from the very beginning today. So if you will, grab your books and we'll start right at the very, very front. Title page of Alcoholics Anonymous. Just wanted to kind of say that this is the foundation of a program of recovery, and it is our basic text. When we talk about our basic text, we're not talking about necessarily fiction or nonfiction, although I suppose you could say that it leans towards nonfiction, but I've never heard the Alcoholics Anonymous being referred to one way or the other. Certainly is a kind of a combination of things, I think, with regard to some of the stories that are being told and how they're being told. We are going to be covering the first portion of the book. I'll talk about that in more detail here in just a minute. But it's not just the first 164 pages. It includes much more than that. So if you turn the page to the next page, which is really kind of the beginning here, we are talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. The title of the book, well, there's a little bit of history there. Hank Parkhurst and Joe Warren are the ones that named Alcoholics Anonymous. And some considerations for this book in the beginning were 100 Men, one of the titles that was thought about. Another title was The Way Out. And yet even another title on that was the Bill W. Movement. Certainly they did, in fact, settle on Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think that was probably of the four that I know of that they thought of, certainly the best one. The next portion here is the where it says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. Most important part of that is the story. What's nice about this is that it's a textbook, but it's told in such a way that it's engaging. There's several stories in here, and if you were to, as we are going to, read through the first portion of the book, it weaves together quite a powerful message. The story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism is the first promise of hope in the book, and it's a collective understanding of all of us with regard to this solution that we're talking about. We are working from the 4th edition, but as with other editions, you're able to follow along in the first portion of the book fairly easily, since there's been little changes, if at all, within the first 4 editions. It's only the stories in the back that have changed, and some subtle differences with regard to some of the footnotes and that type of thing that are different, mainly in the different portions or the different editions of the book. AA is not, this is kind of a disclaimer, AA is not a treatment for alcoholism. AA has a solution for alcoholism, and there's a big difference there with that. All right, if we go ahead and turn the page to the next portion, it's an instruction. I kind of want to talk about this as being a textbook. It's an instructional manual, and its service to others is the actual instruction of the book. Now, this is where I'm going to talk about what the first portion of the book is, and we're going to cover this in a little bit of detail. So if you have a pencil, this is kind of a neat way to break the book apart in the different sections and categories. First of all, the contents that we're talking about with regard to the first portion of the book includes the title page, as we've just talked about here. It also includes all the preface, the foreword to the first, second, third, and fourth edition, the doctor's opinion, all very important parts of the book, and then the first 11 chapters of the book itself, and then the appendices, mainly the spiritual experience on page 567. So that all kind of constitutes the first portion. And out to the left of the page there, I've put above chapter, I added the title page. Then I put a parentheses from chapter, from the word chapter, and then that included preface and the forewords and the doctor's opinion. And the first 11 chapters, I put first portion of the book. I also added at the bottom the appendices underneath the Vision for You, or chapter 11, and page 567. Now out to the right, where you see the page numbers, the preface, and I did this in parentheses as well, but the preface through the foreword to the fourth edition, I put general information and history of the big book. So it's general information and history. The next parentheses I put from the doctor's opinion down to chapter 3, including chapter 3, more about alcoholism, and that is actually covering step 1. We Agnostics, chapter 4, is step 2. How it works, page 58, is where it starts, is steps 3 and 4. Into action is steps 5 through 11. Working with others, obviously, is step 12. And then to wives, chapter 8 through A Vision for You, I put steps 8 through 12. And that is really practicing the principles through all our affairs. So that's kind of what this is a discussion about. Now, in addition to that, in the middle section there, right just to the right of the titles, I put another set of parentheses from chapter 8 through chapter 11. And I put that this is good instruction for sponsoring others. Those last 4 chapters are excellent for review and learning as necessary for somebody that wants to sponsor, or that is going to sponsor other people. And then last but not least, because we cover the founding founders, which is actually Bill W. and Dr. Bob, because we cover Bill's story as a part of our review of the book, we also do Dr. Bob's Nightmare, which we just finished up last week. So that includes, it's technically not included in the first portion of the book, but for our purposes in this group, we do cover Dr. Bob's Nightmare, just so that we give homage to Dr. Bob himself and his story, which I believe is just as important as Bill W.'s story. All right, if we turn the page to the next page 6, or VI, I title this group of stories, which does in fact cover part 1, if you will, as low bottom drunks. That's what they this section is commonly referred to as the low bottom drunks. And that I've got a couple of names for people if they're interested. Obviously, Dr. Bob is part of the first story. The second story, which is starts on page 182, is Alcoholics Anonymous number 3, and that's Bill Dodson, D-O-D-S-O-N. The next story, Gratitude in Action, is Dave Bancroft, Bancroft. The third story, which is Marty Mann, and that's Mann. And somebody we'll hear a lot about throughout the book is our Southern friend. Number 4 is Fitz Mayo, Mayo. Number 5, The Vicious Cycle. Also, somebody we've learned about a little bit is Jim Burwell, Burwell. Next one, number 6, Jim's story is a man by the name of Jim Scott. And then number 7, the man who mastered fear is Archie Trollbridge. Number 8, he sold himself short, is Earl Treat, Treat. And then number 9 is Sylvia Kaufman, Coffman. The next section, which is part 2, is what I call, or what is referred to as, the high bottom drunks. And I only have a couple of names here for this. So on page 7, Rob, do you have the names of all of them on this? No. Okay.
No, I don't, Leo.
All right. I know that number 2, Fear of Fear, is Cecil Kuilkoff, Cuilcof. And then number 4, The Physician Heal Thyself, is a Dr. Earl M. I don't know his last name. So if you go to the next page, which is, again, I don't have all of the names for these, but number 9 on page 8, VIII, is It Might Have Been Worse. That's Chester Rood, and that is RUUD. Down a little ways, number 16, Acceptance Was the Answer. That's Dr. Paul Ollinger, and that is Olinger. And then if we go to the next page, which is part 3, once again, we are back to what is referred to as low bottom drunks for this section. And number 7, On the Move, is Bob Kay, and that is Kay. And then the next page, page X, is number 10, Empty on the Inside, is Beth H. And then a story that didn't necessarily, it resonated with me, if only because I was an aviator growing up throughout my life, and trying to balance alcohol and flying and that type of thing. So for somebody's profession that was heavy machinery and what you might call transportation, although what I would tell you is that's different forms of transportation. Aviation was certainly a big part of my life. It was the major part of my life, and it was my livelihood. So I had to balance this out pretty kind of walk a tight line with regard to my drinking and flying. But the next story, called Grounded, is a man by the name of Lyle Prowse, Prouse. Now, Lyle has spoken. I think he still speaks from time to time as a guest speaker in AA. In addition to that, he's written a book that I have purchased and read, but it's quite an amazing story of a man who does really well in aviation, then falls from grace, if you will, as the first pilot that's ever arrested for flying under the influence of alcohol. And he certainly was drunk when he was flying. And then loses everything, and then goes through recovery, AA, and just due to his who he was and how he handled himself and that type of thing, is one of the only people, if not the only pilot, to ever get his pilot's license back and go back to flying. It's quite a story. So if you're interested, it's a fairly quick read, but it is a good story about somebody that really messes things up, but then really fixes things. All right. Now for the meat of this book and getting started here. This is more than a book. We're on the preface page now. It's a transfer of information. And I also want to say that you need more than knowledge to get sober. So while this book is this kind of knowledge piece and the learning part, it's also an instructional manual on how to find your higher power. And certainly we're going to talk in great detail of the different things that are required in order to be recovered and get sober. So I'm going to say this at the very beginning. This is a book designed to enable you to have a spiritual experience large enough to affect a change for recovery. So it's a great way to say it. It's just a spiritual experience large enough for you to affect a change for recovery. All right, Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you read some of the preface, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about it as we go along.
You got it, Leo. Hi, everybody. We're on page XI, and it's the preface. This is the 4th edition of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,500 copies. The third edition, which came off press in 1976, achieved a circulation of approximately 19,550,000 in all formats. Because this book has become the basic text of our society and has helped such a large number of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th editions. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact, just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor.
Yeah, so the beginning here, first I highlighted this second paragraph. This is one that you hear commonly referred to and repeated. Again, it underlined basic text. Therefore, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. And that's really due to the fact that it's been so darn successful for so many people. There's no reason to change it. And I, for one, am actually very happy that they haven't changed anything in the beginning, the first portion of the book. And again, we want to make sure that we refer back to the first portion. That includes the title page. It includes the preface, which we're reading now, all of the forewords to the different editions, and then chapters 1 through 11. And then on top of that, including the appendices in the back, page 567, the spiritual experience. So with that, I also want to kind of have a shout out for how this kind of we got really popular with reading the book and then learning a little bit about the book. And I'm going to put a shout out to Joe and Charlie. They started their talks way back when, and I think that they single-handedly popularized the book to the point that it has been more well read because of their talks than almost anything else that's going on And certainly, I would just say the success of people finding recovery through this book certainly helps to reinforce that. Rob?
Yeah, I just want to throw out that, normally when you read a book, you start at page 1 and you move on, you start from there. We start right from the title page. Why do we do that? Because there's an awful lot of information that is contained in these parts. That some of it, yeah, you go, well, who cares that there's 19 million copies that have been sold? Big deal. I've got 1 copy. Some of it is dry reading. Some of it you might not find is important. But this book is a basic text. Why do they call it a basic text? Because it's supposed to be studied and it's supposed to instruct us. When you go to school and you get a textbook, same idea. This is supposed to inform us. Okay, so we don't start at page 1, because if we did, we would miss out on the preface, we would miss out on all the forewords, we would miss out on the doctor's opinion, which is one of the most important chapters in the whole book. So whenever you hear the term, it's the first 164 pages, that's not really true. Okay, because when you mentally think about that, you think of page 1 to 164, you had missed the doctor's opinion and all the forwards, which have some incredible knowledge. So that's why we start right at the title page and we go right through it. As I say, some of it we're not going to talk too much about, but it's still important that we understand it. And the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched. Why? Why have they not touched it? Because it works. And alcoholism has not changed since this book was written. So please keep that in mind. The second printing of the first edition added the appendix, Spiritual Experience. In the second edition, the appendices on AA tradition, the medical view and religious view of AA, the Lasker Award, and information on how to contact AA were added, and the appendix on the Alcoholics Foundation was discontinued. But the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's nightmare, and one other personal history from the first edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of 2 stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same headings that are used now. In the third edition, Part 1, Pioneers of AA, was left unchanged. None of the stories in Part 2, They Stopped in Time, were carried over from the second edition. 8 new stories were added. In Part 3, they lost nearly all. 8 stories were retained. 5 new ones were added. This fourth edition includes the 12 concepts for world service and revises the 3 sections of personal stories as follows. 1 new story has been added to Part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in Part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been deleted. 1 of the stories in Part 2 have been carried over. 11 new ones have been added, and 11 taken out. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories. 8 were removed in addition to the 2 that were transferred to Part 1. Leo, you want to comment on any of that?
No, I think,
No?
well, I'll just say this. It's interesting to see how much detail they're going to give us to let us know what the changes were. And, kind of following along there, you'd have to have I think you'd have to have a spreadsheet to kind of figure out, what was added, what wasn't. But it does tell me a couple of things. There's a book out, and I don't know the title of it, that has all of the stories, including everyone that was in the first, second, third, and fourth edition. There it is. Rob's got it, and it's called Experience, Strength, and Hope. So it's interesting if you're interested in those stories. I'm sure as engaging as these stories are, all of them are important, but you could imagine how thick this book would get as they continue to add if they didn't take any out. But the other part of it is that in order to keep the book fresh and interesting for others to really want to get into the book, I found it interesting that they changed as much as they did in the second portion of the book, because obviously the stories were applicable no matter which story they chose. So it was interesting that they kept updating and refreshing that as well. But that's really all I wanted to kind of point out, is that it's indicative of the fact that they're referencing here no changes to the first portion, but then, moderate to big changes for the second portion, of the book. And certainly that has been the case. Rob?
Yeah, a lot of the stories that have been removed were because the people went back out. But we can't assume that they were all done. Any of the stories that were removed were because they went back out. Don't assume that. So, but like Hank Parkhurst, the Unbeliever, was in the first edition. He went back out shortly after this book was written, and his story has been taken out. And if you ever get a chance to read his story, you'll understand why they took it out, because it's very difficult to read. It's not an easy read. All changes made over the years in the Big Book, A members' fond nickname for this volume, have had the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately, and thereby to reach more alcoholics. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me. Or more important, yes, I felt like that. Or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too.
Yeah, one of the things that we do here in some cases, sometimes we change the sentence a little bit in tense, as far as first person, second person, third person type of thing. And certainly here, these last 3 yeses down here, you could also kind of use this as a bit of a test. And after reading this, you could change these into questions, and you could say, did that happen to me? And if your answer is yes, then obviously there you go. Second one is, did I feel like that? And the answer being yes or no, that helps as well. And then the most important, do I believe this program can work for me? And if you say yes, you are well on your way. We'll talk a lot more about belief and faith going forward. But yes, this is kind of a litmus test for if this book would be applicable to you. All right. So we'll move on to page XIII, and that is forward to the first edition. Before we get started in this, I do want to kind of talk about the 3, what I call as the 3 descriptors of this book. It is the problem, the solution, and the course of action. And when I refer to the problem, I'm talking about the admission and the identification of having a problem with alcohol. The solution is really what this book is all about. It provides or prescribes a solution. And then the course of action itself is the application of that solution in order to help you recover. I'm going to read the very first part here, and this is the foreword as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. And it's what I also want to refer to is, just as we go along here, is just remember it's their understanding of Alcoholics Anonymous. All right, with that, Rob.
Okay. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person, and besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all.
Certainly does. A couple of things here is that I highlighted this first paragraph. There's a lot of good information in it. It is more than 100 more than 100 men and women who have recovered. And it's a first reference and first time it's been mentioned, the word recovered. And it brings up a conversation or a discussion, and we'll kind of quickly touch on it right now. We'll refer back to it a couple of times throughout the book, but there is a group, there's two groups of thought out there, and that is one that you're in recovery and always in recovery, you're never recovered. And then there is a group of folks out there that believe that once you've been through this process, you've embraced the solution, and you've found sobriety and for a period of time, and are very strong in that recovery. We essentially have said that we have recovered from alcoholism. Now, when I say that, this group or this thought process is not that you are now you're always an alcoholic, so you always suffer from the allergy. And I won't get too far into the weeds on this, but the mind and body are the two symptoms, and of the body is the allergy to alcohol. And once you start drinking, you can't stop drinking, which is, again, we'll talk more about that as we go along. But you're always going to be an alcoholic. Everybody agrees on that. What we have discussions over, and I'll say that in putting it lightly, is that we actually have recovery. So the next thing I'll underlined that I underlined is that to show other alcoholics precisely. What's neat about this book is that it doesn't leave you. There's no vagueness within this book. If it asks a question, it provides an answer. If it tells you one thing, it is precisely how something is done, and that's a good thing. It makes it a lot easier for the reader to comprehend and apply the solution, because of the fact that it actually shows you precisely how the people have recovered. And that is the main purpose of this book. So another underline there is the main purpose of the book. And I believe, as well as what it says here, it's so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. And I think that that's very true for what they're doing. And I think this is also something out there, as much as anything is a warning, is that many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And it's one thing that you learn by reading this book, and that is that this is an illness, it's a disease. Much like and what we are trying to do is get people to look at it and treat it much like they would something of another disease like cancer or diabetes or something else out there that afflicts us. This alcoholism is of a similar nature in regards to the fact that it is a sickness and not something that we can just flip a switch and turn on and off at will. And this is a way of living. This applies, this process, this solution program applies to all facets of our life. And that's one of the other things that's kind of neat about this book. People that are non-alcoholics actually, and I think that the lucky ones, if you will, pick up this book and read it. I know that I've heard anecdotally that some clergy have referenced this book to have non-alcoholics read the book, because it is such a nice and very desirable way of living. And the 12 steps can certainly be applied across your entire life in anything and everything that you do. That's it. Rob?
Yeah, you know what? I threw an awful lot of stuff in the chat, people, so I do apologize about that, but it's some really important information. And it talked about, we are not cured of alcoholism. What we have is a daily reprieve contingent on our spiritual connection. Okay. And the last line that I read on that paragraph was, and besides, we are sure our way of living has its advantages for all, not just alcoholics. It has its advantages. Spiritual life is good for anybody. And we will see that as we go through. This book isn't talking just to alcoholics. It is talking to everybody. It's trying to inform the people that don't understand alcoholism what alcoholism is. Alcoholism is not a behavioral problem. Alcoholism is an illness, and they're going to get into that. Okay, so I won't spoil it for you, but what are the symptoms? We'll get into that in a little bit. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupations in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an advocation. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to omit his personal name, designate himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped.
Yes. So this is one of the main tenets of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we do use the word anonymous very stringently. It is important to remain anonymous. Part of that is that we still carry a stigma about us with regard to people not knowing the full effects of alcoholism, and the fact that it isn't a choice of ours. It is, again, a disease that we suffer from. But people think that you could just decide not to drink and then everything would be fine, and it's a weakness or laziness or a character flaw that somehow prevents you from stopping drinking, which is just not the case. I might also say that I think maybe in the beginning, maybe not, I'm not so sure, but I don't know that this is business and professional folk is really accurate today. I think that you've got all facets of avocation or what I would call jobs and things like that. It runs the gamut. We are a mixed bag of people, and we come from all socioeconomic facets of life. So I think that certainly there are business and professional people in the organization of Alcoholics Anonymous, but it isn't all. But I do believe that the anonymous part of it is one of the most powerful pieces of this, and it's what keeps people, it's what attracts people to the program, and it's also what keeps people in the program, because they can there's a level of safety and security that you feel and you have with regard to that, because of the fact that we stringently are so anonymous in our approach. Rob?
Yeah, now the internet, Facebook, the pandemic caused an awful lot of problems with the anonymity problem. You know, we're on Zoom, okay? You know, everybody here has used, most everybody has used their last initial. One of the problems with that, though, is that if somebody goes into the hospital and you want to go visit them, it's very difficult to go into the reception and say, hey, I'm looking for Gary with the big ears. You know, Gary, he's got big ears. You know, we make light of situations, but I've done that where I knew one guy as Rocker John. That was his name within the rooms. When he went into the hospital, you know, I didn't know his last name. I was able to find him because he was in a very small hospital. But it's something where, you know, anonymity is great, okay, to a certain extent. But to our good friends, you know, I'm sure they know our last name. So, and Facebook has really changed, you know, you join a group, you join friends, etc. We know their last name. So, you know, things have changed since 1939. They didn't have Facebook and the internet at that time. So times change. They didn't have Zoom. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We're not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcome. Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah, I think this is an important thing that's kind of touched on, but not really covered. And I think it's important that we bring it up. And that is that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. Doesn't say that you have to have already stopped drinking to be a member. It doesn't say that you have to be of a certain religion or a certain income level, a certain color, creed, et cetera, et cetera. And it's interesting that in the beginning, I don't have an accurate kind of summary of it, but I can tell you that there were several qualifiers and descriptors in order to become a member of Alcoholics Anonymous by some of the groups that were started up after Ohio and New York. But I would tell you that they finally got to the point that it was just so prohibitive and so restrictive and very narrow focus that finally Bill W. said enough was enough. The only requirement is a desire to stop drinking. And it certainly has held today. And I think that's also one of the best things that's ever happened to AA is that those limitations or those requirements, if you will, were eliminated. And it was made so that you can become a member if all you do is desire to stop drinking. The other thing too is that it's self-sufficient and supported, and so there is no requirement for fees or dues. And certainly, even with this group, we have a weekly meeting, but there are no dues. We just don't touch the money with this particular group. Certainly, you can contribute to AA, and there are ways to do that. But a lot of groups do that. And it does support Zoom memberships. It also, with the in-person meetings, supports the rent for a particular room on a weekly basis, or it might also pay for coffee, donuts, cookies, etc. Which, if we could, wouldn't it be neat if we could do that as a Zoom group? But nonetheless, we don't do that. So there's no requirement for you to have to contribute any amount of money whatsoever at all. And there's no particular faith, sect, or denomination. There's no alliance with that at all. In fact, while there are religious undertones with regard to Alcoholics Anonymous, it is not a religion. And therefore, any and all believers and non-believers, and I don't even like to use those descriptors. It's just everybody is welcome to be a part of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it doesn't matter what your faith might be in order to be there. And I think this is nice. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted, and that is a catch-all for everything. The other thing is that this is a we program, not a me program. Just as a factoid out there, we is used 18 times in this book. The last time
and it's just that section.
Just in this section. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for that. The other thing I want to point out here is that this is also the first reference to working with other alcoholics. It's referred to multiple times in here. It is a well-known fact, and it's been proven time and time again. Every day of the week, it actually is proven, and that is working with other alcoholics ensures a great amount of immunity for the person working with another alcoholic from drinking. So the nice thing is that they do refer to it several times in the book, and that is referenced back to our step 12, but it is an important facet of the success of this program and for the individual alcoholic. The more you work with others, the stronger your recovery is, and staying sober. Rob?
Yeah, the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. They took honest out in the preamble in 1958. Also, we are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. Bill was big on that. He didn't want to get anybody, coming back at AA saying, oh, it doesn't work, or this, that, or the other. No controversy whatsoever. Stay out of controversy, Don't say something that somebody else can jump all over you about. So you'll notice that in the book, So, and I'll point them out later on as we go through it. So forward to the second edition. Figures given in this foreword describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. I have to remember the first edition and the second edition forewords were written by Bill. So I want you to keep that in mind. Since the original foreword to this book was written in 1939, a wholesome miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Already continues to early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all of the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead.
Yeah, kind of amazing here if you think about it with regard to the forms of communication and connectivity that we had back then were still largely the snail mail and the telephone, and to some extent TV and radio. But certainly the growth of Alcoholics Anonymous into these 6,000 groups and over 150,000, certainly more than 150,000, is a testament to this book and the ability for it to actually assist in people's recovery, and therefore that great word being passed around out there gets these groups to grow into what they are, even today. But on top of that, in 50 plus foreign countries. So that in and of itself is also amazing to me, in that they were able to reach out and go beyond the United States, Canada, etc. Some other some other countries out there were able to pick this book up and certainly start to see some benefit from it. Rob?
Okay. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck in Akron, Ohio in June 1935, during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience, following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism, who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. He could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford group. He was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God.
Yeah, this is kind of important here. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group. We're talking about, of course, the Akron, Ohio group of folks, and that was with Dr. Bob primarily, but also Bill W., doing that, the New York stockbroker and Akron physician. And we talk about 6 months earlier that the broker had been relieved of his drunk obsession, which we found that was in jeopardy, or at least mildly, if not moderately in jeopardy there while he was in Akron working on a business deal that we'll learn about later on. And the meeting that they're talking about is between Bill and Dr. Bob, and that meeting went on for more than 6 hours. And that was the beginning of AA as we know it, with two alcoholics working together. And the last thing I could also kind of put in here is that some of the things that the Oxford group believed in were carried over and created some of the 12 steps. But as far as that goes, you could see this in a summary here. Pretty much the program is of this, and that is that convinced of a moral inventory. That would be our step 4, confession of personality defects. That would be the step 5, restitution to those harmed, or step 9, and helpfulness to others is step 12. And then the necessity of belief in and a dependence upon God is really kind of our step 2 and in our step 3. So quite a few of the steps that we know today came out of the Oxford group. Again, we'll learn more about the Oxford group as we go forward, but nonetheless, it was a good beginning, I think. I think it played an important role in gathering people, and I think that pulling those people together wouldn't have happened quite to the extent that it did in the beginning had the Oxford group not been a part of Bill and Dr. Bob. Rob?
Yeah, Leo, it's 12:53. Do you want to bring Mr. Bill into it?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that now. We'll
hopefully he'll tell a pizza story. Hey, Bill.
Hi, this is Bill, alcoholic from New Jersey. Thanks a lot, guys. Good job today. The front portion of this book, where we started, it's a little bit hard to explain sometimes. Basically, what it is, it's just giving us a preview of what's going to go on here in this book. It talks on the title page. Basically, it's just the title page, and it has the first promise of hope, like was mentioned. And that's the first time that I can find that this book mentions the word recovered. And we can go back and forth with recovered and recovering over and over again. And basically the book says recovered, so I go along with what the book says. I'm not going to argue with a book that saved my life. So if anybody wants to call it something different, that's obviously their prerogative. Go right ahead. And then it has the contents in here, and it basically tells us what's in this book and where it is. And like Leo pointed out, the part 1 is basically low bottom drunks, or part 2 is high bottom drunks, and part 3 is low bottom drunks again. And basically the difference between a high bottom drunk and a low bottom drunk is the low bottom drunks lost everything. They usually lost their house, their job, their family, that kind of stuff. A high bottom drunk is just as drunk as a low bottom drunk. They just didn't lose everything. For whatever reason, they got away with what they were doing, and they didn't lose their job, they didn't lose their house, they didn't lose their family, or whatever. That's all. Basically, a drunk is a drunk. It's just a matter of how far down the scale they went and how many things they lost. So it's basically they're the same thing as far as alcoholism goes. And talks about the preface, and the preface just gives us like basically an overview of what this book is. It's called the basic text. In other words, this is a textbook. It's something we're supposed to study. We're supposed to learn something from it. And what are we supposed to learn from? We're supposed to learn a new way of living so that we can stay sober. That's basically what this whole thing comes down to. And then it talks about the forward to the first edition. And there's some good information in there. It tells us what this book is, what the main purpose of the book. And that's to show other alcoholics precisely how we recovered is the main purpose of the book. In other words, this book is not something that you read for entertainment or when you're bored or whatever. The purpose of this book is to show alcoholics how to stay sober, how to get sober and stay sober. That's basically what it is. And when it says how we recovered, we is indicating the first 100. We doesn't mean me and you. We weren't around when this book was written. So basically the whole purpose of this book is to show alcoholics how the first 100 recovered, what process they went through, what they did. So if we want to recover, we can go through the same process they did, and then there's a real good chance that we'll recover also. And it also says no further authentication will be necessary. That means this book has all the information necessary for somebody to get sober and stay sober. We don't need to look anywhere else. We don't need to come up with any other things. I like to use the analogy of the pizza. I'm the pizza delivery guy. My job is to deliver the pizza exactly how it was put in the box. I'm not supposed to add stuff to it. I'm not supposed to change it. I'm not supposed to open up the box and add more pepperoni, more sausages, more cheese, more sauce, more anchovies or whatever. I'm going to wind up with a box of slop. As a delivery guy, my job is to deliver that pizza exactly how it was put in the box. And as a member of AA, my job is to deliver this message exactly how it was put in this book. I'm not supposed to add anything to it. There's nothing that needs to be added to this. This book contains all the information necessary for me to learn how to stay sober, to live my life in such a way that I don't have to drink again. And that's basically what they're trying to tell us here. And on the last page of the forward to the first edition, it says, it mentions working with other alcoholics. We're not even up to step 1 yet, and they're already talking about how important it is to work with other alcoholics. That's basically what this whole book comes down to, and that's what we're supposed to do. That's the solution for alcoholism, is to try to help other alcoholics stay sober. Because this disease and this solution works the opposite way that we think it would. It's got nothing to do with willpower, nothing to do with smarts. It's got to do with our spirituality. And how do we get spiritual? By working self-sacrifice for others. And that's what keeps us sober. And then we got into the beginning of the forward to the second edition. And I like this forward. There's a ton of history in here. And I like the history of AA because the history of AA, to me, proves that AA is real, proves that it happened. This isn't just a fictional story that somebody made up to sell a book. If you follow along with all of this stuff and you can look up the things on the internet and you can find out that all this stuff actually really happened to different people. So it's actually a true story, everything that went on in AA. And that, to me, makes this whole book real and it makes this book come alive because this isn't just a story that somebody made up to try to get me to stop drinking. It's actually a story that happened to a whole bunch of people and how they were able to stop drinking. So to me, that proves it and validates everything that's in here. And we're coming up on the top of the hour, so that's all I got. Thanks a lot for letting me share.
Thank you so much, Bill. I love that pizza story.
All right, Rob, we'll close out with the serenity prayer.
You got it. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.